down 35%. Yes, that's the number from the immigration minister today, putting a hard cap on student visas for Canada over the next 2 years. Also, are we as Canadians feeling more confident with the interest rate plan? Because if we do, we're going to see more buyers get off the fence over the next little while. This is what we talk about and more with our good friend, Mr. Dion Beg, right after this. Here we are, my friends, with our favorite mortgage broker in all of the land, Mr. Dion Beg. How you doing, my man?
Hey, Gary. I'm great. How you doing, man?
Excellent, excellent. So it's Monday, January 22nd, the hot buzz. The hot buzz is students and housing, and of course, our housing fiasco here in Canada. And you and I were just doing some research, and we're going to circle back to this in a future call, like really soon.
For sure.
The amount of revenue, like just one university is bringing in to themselves is ridiculous. We had no idea. U of T
My
has, go
jaw
ahead.
drop. Hang on. Before you give it away, Gary, I'm going to say to the listeners, okay, U of T, University of Toronto, if you had to guess what the annual revenue, that's the top line revenue of that institution was, like pick a number right now, lock it in your brain, whatever number you think that is.
Yeah.
Okay, we've given you that second. Okay, Gary, drop the truth bomb. What's the number?
It starts with a 3 and it
Okay.
ends at $1 billion. It's actually 3.36 billion is their total revenues for 2023-24. That's their expected growth is ridiculous. We had no idea it was that big. These are small countries. these
Correct.
these universities. We're going to dive into some of those details in a future call, because one of the hot topics, as I just mentioned, Dion, is as of today, our immigration minister is putting a cap on immigration for students. I should rephrase that, to student visas over the next 2 years, a 35% reduction. We've talked about this, right?
Yeah. So you and I have been discussing this for a long time. So what they've done is apparently they've dropped, or they put this cap on, which will reduce the flow of international students down by 35%. So down from around 550,000. And in particular, this relates to undergraduates. That's the key word here. So undergraduates from 550,000 down to 360,000 for this year and for next year. So a 35% reduction. But it doesn't discuss post-grad students, right? And I know I've seen, they're saying this top line number is 550, but I know I've seen reports of as high as 800,000 total students in Canada.
Yeah. And also we had mentioned a few videos ago that, excuse me, in order to qualify for that student visa, they have to prove that they've got $20,000 in cash before that's approved. So we're getting there, folks. We're getting there one step at a time. And you had mentioned to me off camera too that the mayor of Brampton has some what's the word I'm looking for? He's putting together some ideas towards the Canadian government, because every city in Canada is facing a housing crunch, and of course the city of Brampton, where there's a number of schools, isn't a significant one. I like his idea too, Dion.
Yeah, so again, something that you and I have discussed, I encourage the viewers go back and watch a couple of weeks ago where we talked about the idea that maybe they should be linking a student visa with proof of accommodation, right? In that, if you're coming to this country, maybe you should also prove that you have accommodation set up prior to. And you know what, Gary? I think the people in the government must be listening to you and me, because this is, again, what Patrick Brown has suggested. It's just pure logic, right? It's just pure logic. You hope that common sense prevails along the way. And somebody in government has put their hand up and said, and he's actually written a letter to the federal government saying that all municipalities should prove that if they're issuing these international student visas, that they should also be proving where these people are residing. And again, logically, they should be residing within a decent proximity to the institution where they're studying at. Now, I don't exactly know the parameters of what that proximity would be, but surely it couldn't be more than 100 kilometers away. And it should be commutable distance. But again, common sense, which seems to often be missing in government, is finally being discussed. And hopefully this gets to that level where it's not only just the 20 grand you need in a bank account, it's also that you can prove that you actually have accommodation set up prior to landing in Canada.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And there are schools out there, and we're experiencing one ourselves personally, where they will provide housing, let alone not only for 1 year but for multiple years. So, if you have children of that age, go seek out those universities if you want to secure that housing for sure. Uh, this is like I said, I think we started with baby steps, and now we're into those toddler steps, right? I think we're making some moves in the right direction, and albeit it won't be enough for some, and it's too much for others. But we need to obviously, from the schooling perspective and the housing perspective for students, that has to change. Because if you go down any Facebook group or Twitter feed or what have you, people are renting out rooms and beds, and this is the state of the times. It really is, and we've got to do something different here.
Yeah, actually, Gary, I'll just mention an article that I read recently. There's a company out there called Spaces Shared.
Mm.
And what they do is they actually link Canadian seniors with students. And basically, these Canadian seniors, let's just say they have a 3 or 4 bedroom home, they're by themselves. They would actually list on the site where they could bring an international student in, not necessarily international, but a student in. And not only would they provide accommodation, but also the student would do some things around the house, such as shovel the snow,
Oh, interesting.
change light bulbs, things like that. So it's not just a financial trade-off, but there's actually some work involved, which makes a lot of sense. It also seems to, help this sort of loneliness epidemic that's going around with people, especially seniors who may be living by themselves. So I think that's not a bad idea. And apparently there is checking in, there's regulation, there's an external third party that manages, the relationships and make sure everybody's happy. So Shared Spaces is that
Interesting.
website that I came across the other day.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. And actually I had friends that were empty nesters living just outside of San Francisco of all places, and that was one of the things that they did to fill that house and fill those empty room and bedrooms and so forth. And they would lease out a bedroom to a student for a semester, and they had a really great experience doing that. So
Right.
there you go, my friends. We are
Mhm.
making progress. The Canadian government is making progress. Uh, Words that are not often said in the same sentence.
Let's see, but just hope it keeps going forward. We have some momentum. We're going the right direction.
That's right. That's right. Okay. Speaking of momentum and
Hmm.
where we are financially as a country, inflation numbers have just come out again just prior to our interest rate announcement. So what's the story there?
Yeah, so look, overall, we should be happy that we're down from our peak. Our peak, if we just remind everybody, was at 8.1% inflation, and that was just over a year ago. And now, where are we? Well, as of 2 months ago, we were at 3.1. And as of now, we're at 3.4. So it has ticked up a touch. And when that information came out late last week, you did see the bond market react accordingly. And some of these fixed interest rates, which had been dropping, did bump up a touch, just so everybody knows, right? The question then is, how is this going to translate to the decisions that Tiff Macklem and his crew need to make a couple of days from now on Jan 24? The overall feeling here is, in using Tiff Macklem's own words, are he's not looking at hiccups, he's looking at trends.
Mm.
And so what that means is the trend is overall down. Yes, we've gone from 3.1 to 3.4. Hopefully he views that as a hiccup. I don't think anybody in the Canadian financial world thinks that Tiff Macklem's going to change his mind and start increasing interest rates, right? But what it might do is it might delay the button on the down direction, right? Meaning that if inflation lingers around these 3% rates and our target is twos, then will he push that button down on in March, or is it likely going to be June, July, or could it potentially be September? And so this is why we need to be watching that inflation number as to figure out when that downward next step will come.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was reading some information over the weekend, and I'd like to get your 2 cents on this as well, or 25 cents, or even more.
I'll take
Uh,
it.
yeah, the 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 outset, or the mindset is, oh my gosh, interest rates are still, higher than perhaps where I took my mortgage 3 years ago or 4 years ago, my fixed rate or what have you. Um, Yet the underlying tone from the industry, we'll call it, or industry, writers and economists in a sense is if Canadians know that there is a plan from the Canadian government in interest rates, that'll provide enough stability into the market where we won't see some crazy rocket or peaks and valleys, but it'll provide some buyer confidence as long as we know that there's a
Yeah, that's
plan.
right.
You know what I mean?
And I
So I'd
think
like to get your
correct. I
ideas
think
on that. Yeah.
yeah, so I mean, you and I last year in particular were talking about how the Canadian consumer just consistently felt like the rug was being pulled out from under them, right? They were trying to make big decisions about their future, but they felt they were forced to make these decisions on shaky ground. And a confused and a concerned mind just doesn't move forward, and that's why we have so many people just sitting on the sidelines, not buying, stuck in their first home, not willing to make that step into their next home, even though their family requires a larger home. People are just making do with what they have. But yes, if we can provide that customer, so that the consumer sentiment that is positive, then that's what's going to lead to upward trends in pricing. And we mentioned this briefly, Gary, in the past call, but there's this idea that you marry the price but you date the rate.
Mm.
And I just wrote an article on this, so let me just expand on that. And that is just the idea that when you buy a property, the price you pay will always be the price you paid. So let's just say, if you pay $1 million for that property today, well, that'll always be the price you paid. But when you get that property, you take it with an interest rate at 5.3%. That 5.3% does not mean that you'll always have that rate of 5.3. And in other reports published by RBC just in the last week, they've projected that they expect interest rates to drop by 1 full percentage point this year, plus another 1% next year, which would take our BOC rate from 5 all the way down to 3%.
Mm.
And so, again, this is stuff that I feel like the Canadian consumer is slowly coming to understand. And I think, this idea that interest rates could drop by 2% over the next 2 years has been enough. And you've already, reported recently about the fact that even in this minus 20 degrees weather, people have been out and there've been multiple offers. So it seems to be seeping in at that buyer level and back into the market that, there's reason to be positive. And yeah, maybe that you'll pay $1 million and your monthly payment might be X, but in a year, maybe a year from now, that might be X minus a couple of $100, right? Which is what people are sort of moving into right now.
It and I know I've asked this in the last little while, but I'm going to keep asking it because it's incredibly relevant. And our market changes from week to week, which means
Yeah.
the mortgage industry and what you're seeing can change from week to week. Are people still leading, or they've gone back to taking, if you're buying a new home or refinancing something, variable rates versus the fixed rate? Are we taking variable rate mortgages right now?
Yeah. So in the last week, we've helped some people with 5-year variables, and we've had that conversation where they said to themselves, okay, weighing all the options, even though the 5-year variable is higher than the 5-year fixed, they're taking that, educated guess based on the market data that rate will slowly slide down. And just so everybody knows, if you take a variable rate and you go 2 years in and you've got 3 years left, if the 3-year fixed rate looks extraordinarily better than your 5-year variable, you can break your 5-year variable and jump into that 3-year fixed with a minimal penalty, right? And versus locking into a 5-year, which would require a much higher penalty. So we've had these much deeper strategic conversations with clients, weighing the costs and benefits, and saying, if this was to happen in year 1 versus year 4, and you were to change and break, what would that result in? And yeah, a lot of people have basically leaned back towards the variable at this time.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting, and I think it's something that you have to keep your eye on. You got to have your ear to the ground to kind of have an idea of where interest rates are going. And we talked about that. As long as there's a plan, right? As long as the Canadians
Yeah.
believe that the government has a strong plan in place, and we're going to get a good glimpse of that. Is it on Wednesday or Wednesday is the announcement? Yeah,
Wednesday, that's right.
yeah.
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 So
Also, just anecdotally, Gary, I'll mention that we've been working with a client who has bought land and built houses. So this is not like a massive developer. It's just a guy who'll do a one-off here or one-off there. And he's just reapproached us recently to buy some land and build. And he's been waiting for a time where he could see the market at a point where it made sense for him to start to do that again. And, he's putting hundreds of thousands of dollars on the line, having done this for many years. And saying now's the time for him to re-enter the market. So if people at that, what I would call the riskier end of the market, are re-entering, it's a pretty good sign.
yeah, good stuff. Good stuff. All right, my friends. A little shorter video today, but lots of good stuff with students and heading in the right direction. The Canadian government is they're working hard. They're trying to fix obviously that pendulum. They're trying to slow that pendulum down. We know that it swings back and forth pretty quickly when it does get momentum, but they're trying to slow it down and end up
They
in the
should.
middle, right?
Some of this mess, we have to remind everybody, was created by the government. So they're just trying to clean up their own mess.
Yeah,
I think,
exactly.
especially before an election year.
Oh, no doubt. No doubt. No doubt. So, and Dion alluded to this. We are seeing activity quicker than typical here in the GTA, and we are that entry level price point. Wherever you happen to be in the GTA, that's the most aggressive one at this moment. So be prepared if you're looking at purchasing a home. You may walk into multiple offers, or if you've got that home to sell, now might be a good time to have that conversation because there's not as much competition in that next level up or that next purchase, moving from, say, a townhouse to a 4-bedroom detached home. That hasn't quite hit yet, but I have a feeling it will. It definitely will for sure come springtime.
Okay, awesome. Yeah,
Good
maybe in
stuff.
a future video, Gary, I'd like to see some recent sales, like what people have been buying. It'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, we can do that. We can do that. All right, my friend. How do people get a hold of you?
Yeah, kangamortgage.ca or Instagram at the Dion Beg.
Excellent. Well, that's Dion Beg. I'm Gary McGowan. We'll see everybody in the next video. Goodbye for now.